Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now guys, wonders will never end, the saying goes, and the place that this applies to the most is Nigeria, the most wondrous of places on this planet. Guys, I bring you this. Presidency mocks Soyinka over comment on lockdown. So this is now the wonder that we're contending with. Malam Buhari, I'm not talking about anybody else other than Malam Buhari, mocking the Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka on lockdown. So Malam Buhari, just so you are clear in your mind what we are going into with this video, Malam Buhari, who we have been chasing around for the last 10-15 years for his school start, is mocking Professor Wole Soyinka regarding his comments on the lockdown. So now let's now see what manner of mirth the Malame is throwing in the direction of the prof. So the headline: Presidency mocks Soyinka over comments on lockdown. So that's the headline that we're contending with. Presidency mocks Soyinka on comments on lockdown. So now let's now get into it straight away. The presidency yesterday took a swipe at the Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka over his comment on the 14-day lockdown ordered by President Muhammadu Buhari, saying that he is not an expert in the area. The presidency told Professor Wole Soyinka that he lacked professional competence to kick against the decision of the president because he is not a medical professor. They were mere semantics and not science. It reads, yesterday the esteemed Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka made comments on the legal status and description of the 14-day lockdown announced by President Muhammadu Buhari. Professor Soyinka is not a medical professor. His qualifications are in English literature and his prices are for writing books and plays for the theater. He is of course entitled to his opinion, but that is exactly all they are: semantics, not science. They cannot and should not therefore be judged as professional expertise in this matter in any shape or form. Across the world, from all parts of the United States and China to countries including the United Kingdom and France, government-mandated lockdowns are in place to slow and defeat the spread of the global situation. All have been declared and all have been made necessary based on medical and scientific evidence. The guidance of the Nigerian government's medical specialist is to advise the same. Professor Soyinka has also declared, doubtless based on his specialism as a playwright, that we are not in a war emergency. Eminent scientists say otherwise. Dr. Richard Hackett, head of the International Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations and former director of the United States Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, has said war is an appropriate analogy. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the United States National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and member of the White House Pandemic Task Force, has said the battle against the pandemic is almost like the fog of war. As for the legality of the lockdown, the government of Nigeria's primary duty in law and action is the defense of the people of Nigeria. We face global pandemic. Nigeria is now affected. The scientific and medical guidance the world over is clear. The way to defeat the virus is to halt its spread through limitation of movement of people. Perhaps Wole Soyinka may write a play on the pandemic after the emergency is over. In the meantime, we ask the people of Nigeria to trust the words of our doctors and scientists and not fiction writers at this time of national crisis. So now this is the most acerbic of put downs that I have heard in a very long time. and I'm sure, of course, that this was not written by Gabashew, because the Gabashew, of course, does not have the language skills or the intellectual sagacity to come up with this so epic put down. So now, agree and disagree, plus and minus, the gray areas is where we are with this whole thing. So first, let's start it from the top. Professor Wole Soyinka put out this statement to say that Malam Buhari is not within rights to lock down or is it Osun State or Ogun State, Lagos State, and the FCT, because the Constitution does not confer that authority on him, Malam Buhari. So that is right, and that is the reading of a lot of the senior lawyers in Nigeria, because a lot of the senior advocates, including Afem Falana, have come out to say this, but it is not within the purview of Wole Soyinka to say this, because Wole Soyinka, of course, is not a lawyer. And then, of course, to then go to the other side, and I am reticent to even say anything that would color Malam Buhari's regime in any particular bright light. But the received wisdom all over the world is that there has to be a containment of people in some form of isolation before to give that breathing space for the world to tackle this pandemic and find a solution to it. Because of course, if we continue with business as usual, the infection rate will be that much heightened that it will just, and by the way, this thing that we're contending with is a new thing, so we don't really know what coloration it fully has. This is something that might well be able to transmute and mutate even into a higher thing. It might well mutate into something that is airborne, and if it becomes airborne, then really the bubonic plague will be like a child's play compared to what this thing can ravage and savage on the peoples of the world. So this is a global situation that is being led by the highest form of global science, and the best practice that the highest form of global science is putting forth is the practice that we should abide by. So yes, fundamental human rights, the Constitution, etc. You see, all of these things that we talk about sometimes, fundamental human rights or the Constitution, all of these things are put in place to serve the well-being of the people. So the people are not there to serve the Constitution or the fundamental human rights or whatever. The Constitution and the fundamental human rights are there to serve the people. And this is exactly the point that this Gabashew is making. That, look, listen, there's a global consensus that there has to be social distancing, there has to be people isolation. We have to first lock down the whole world effectively to then contend and contain this thing, either for it to wash away and fade away, or for us to find a medical cure to it. But whatever solution that we are going to find to it, we need the breathing space to be able to do that, and that breathing space is provided by social distancing, people staying indoors, and people not spreading the infection. Because you know, they say this global situation that it stays around for a good while, especially on plastic and steel, and then of course it can be transmitted. And you know, Nigerians, they operate in close quarters. You are close to the person you are talking to, almost to the point that they are spitting all over it. If you don't have good denture, or if you're titty, you know, you're spitting all over each other in conversation sometimes. Say it, don't spray it, and all that kind of thing. So we have all of these things, and Nigeria is not the most hygienic sort of place. Go to any city in Nigeria and you find out exactly that. There's a refuse everywhere. The whole place is just a stink fest, and the whole thing is just completely infested with. It's just because the people have adapted to their environment that that's the reason, really, I should say, that we don't have a lot of infection within the Nigerian space. because an environment like Nigeria is fertile ground, is extremely rife for infection, all manners of infection, and I'm not even sure what sort of infection will still come out of that African sub-region that the world will contend with at the moment. But really, going back to the narrative, I'm not going to say I weigh on the side of Malam Buhari. I will never weigh on the side of Malam Buhari, but I do weigh on the side of medical science that if containment and isolation are the panaceas that has been identified as best practice at the moment, then we have to abide by that. And Professor Wole Soyinka, as this clown in Asorok rightly said, is a professor of literature, not a professor of medical science or chemistry or bio, whatever it is not a medical man, is a man of literature and words. So this is not his specialism, and this is not really his area of contribution. So he could have just made some abstract statement without going into specifics if he wants to criticize the Buhari regime, but certainly he should not be speaking to law and he should not be speaking to medicine, because those are not his specialisms. And if he does do that, then he gets the clap back that you're now getting from this Malami guy, Garba Shehu, and whoever wrote it. I'm sure it's a Yoruba man that actually wrote the text for Garba Shehu to read out, because this doesn't sound to me like the intellectual capacity of somebody like Garba Shehu, or really any Malami. So conversations in the comment section. Malam Buhari mocks Wole Soyinka. This is what we are now contending with within the Nigerian space. What says you? Come share thoughts. But before you do that, click on the red subscribe button so it turns gray. Bell button notifies you every time I drop a new video. Then come tell me what you are making of this Malami saying Obi to Professor, our esteemed Professor Wole Soyinka, in the comment section. So I'll leave you here. Carry this conversation on with you in the comment section. But here I say peace.